Today I'm going to tell you everything you always wanted to know about nettle, but didn't think to ask. Because maybe you didn't even know what nettle was, or maybe you knew it as a weedy plant and didn't think much more about it. But nettle is a seriously incredible plant that's worth knowing. To celebrate this lovely plant, we're going to learn how to identify, harvest, and prepare nettle. There are several species of nettle, but for this video, we are going to focus on the stinging nettle, or Urtica dioica. Nettle is native to Europe and Asia, but it's now found worldwide. So if we're going to find nettle, we need to know where it likes to grow or what its habitat is. So nettle prefers rich soil that's generally moist, but it also likes the sun. So where would it be like a sunny spot, but it still has that moisture in the soil? Well, think openings along rivers, streams, and lakes. It's also often found by manure piles because it's that really rich soil. It can also be found along ditches or fence rows and on the lower parts of farm fields or an empty lot where water is going to collect and that soil would stay moist. So now let's identify some nettle. We have a nice patch growing here at the farm. So nettle is a perennial and it spreads by rhizome. So once you found a nettle patch, you know it's going to grow back in the same spot each year. Nettle grows to be a tall, slender plant, but these are smaller plants in the springtime, so they'll grow to be a lot taller. Typically have a single stem. If it's injured, it will shoot off branches, but for the most part, it will have a long, narrow single stem. It has a squarish stem with 4 grooves running along it. It's also very fibrous, and it gets more fibrous as the plant matures. So as you can see, it gets a little stringy here. In fact, nettle can be made into a high quality, long lasting cloth because of these fibers. And they've found nettle cloth dating back to the Bronze Age in a burial site in Denmark. So that's a testament to just how high quality and long lasting that fiber is. And it's not often made today, nettle cloth, because it's quite labor intensive. Looking at the leaves here, we can see that they are opposite each other. And in terms of shape, they are what plant people call lanceolate because the mature leaf, it's a lot longer than it is wide and it tapers to a point. So it could be lance shaped. Newer leaves, smaller leaves can be more egg shape, what's called ovate, so a little more rounder but broader at the base. The edges are what's called serrated or jagged or toothed, and the leaves have pretty deep veins here. Later in the season, nettle will flower, and it has flower clusters along the stem at the nodes. So, of course, stinging nettle is known for its sting. So nettle has stinging hairs along the stem, the petioles, and the leaves. When they hit something, the hairs break and release formic acid. Formic acid comes from the Latin word formica, which means ant, because formic acid was first isolated from the bodies of venomous ants. And in my personal experience, how bad the sting is varies from region to region and plant to plant. So here I think the stings are kind of quite mild in the Midwest, but out in the Pacific Northwest I thought that the stings were more intense. And sometimes the pain that I get from the stings goes away almost immediately. Other times that feeling can last for part of the day. Now that you know where to find nettle and how to identify it, let's harvest some. So I usually like to wear gloves to harvest nettle, but the more hardy foragers and farmers forego gloves and just know different tricks to avoid getting stung. So if you harvest using your fingertips where the skin is thicker, you're less likely to get stung, but I'm just not there yet. So you can wear gloves, you cannot wear gloves, up to you. The sting might not be that painful to you. But I like thin garden gloves because to me they're protective enough, flexible enough to harvest easily. When you harvest nettle depends on what you want to do with it. So if you're going to eat nettle, the best time to harvest is in the early spring when the plants are still young. Like right now is a good time to harvest nettle to eat. And you can harvest the top portion of the plant and eat both the stem and the leaves. But later in the season, you can still eat the leaves, the newer leaves, but the rest of the plant will be much too fibrous. Very chewy, not enjoyable. For teas, tinctures, and other herbal preparations, you can harvest nettle later into the season, but still before it flowers is best. For nettle roots, you want to harvest when the plant is dormant in the early spring or fall. And then for nettle seeds, you obviously have to wait until the plant flowers and then set seed. If you don't have a wild source of nettle, you can also grow it yourself. Nettle has a long history as a medicinal herb. In fact, Hippocrates, the ancient Greek physician, described 61 medicinal uses for nettle. And I won't be able to give a full account of nettle's supportive actions on the body, but in general, know that nettle is nutritive, it's detoxifying, and it's stimulating. Nettle is often used as a nutritive herb to strengthen and support the whole body. So it's rich in vitamins, minerals, fiber, protein, and chlorophyll. Nettle is known to help remove uric acid from the body. Uric acid is a waste product of digestion and is associated with gout and other inflammatory conditions. Other active constituents in nettle help ease seasonal allergies and manage blood sugar. Nettle root is also used to support men's prostate health. Some people will even take advantage of nettle's stinging properties for osteoarthritis and muscle pain. So they will intentionally get stung with nettle in their affected area, the joint or muscle that's hurting them. So this is called self-flagellation or urtification, where you take the nettle and intentionally get those hives or blisters. And these people report that their pain reduces for several days following that. And there are some early reports that say that this, using nettle stings was used to help stimulate paralyzed limbs. So that's incredibly fascinating to me. Of course, this isn't the extent of nettle's medicinal tradition, but generally, nettle is tonically nutritive and acutely stimulating. For herbal preparations, you can use either dried nettle or fresh nettle. One thing you can do with nettle is make a nettle tea. So I'm just shoving some fresh nettle into this little strainer here. You can also make a tea with dry nettle as well. And then I'm going to pour some boiling water in and then cover it and let it sit for about 10 to 15 minutes. After that, you can see I have a nettle infusion. And if you taste it, it tastes very savory. You can tell how many nutrients are in there and all the minerals in there too. You can also make a nettle tincture to get the medicinal benefit of nettle. So I'm just going to chop up some fresh nettle here, and then I'm going to shove it into a jar, trying to press it down as best as I can. And then I'll cover it with a high-proof alcohol and then let it extract for a month to 6 weeks. So this is considered the folk method of making a tincture, which is just putting some herb in a jar, covering it with a high-proof alcohol, and letting it extract that way. You can also get a lot more specific with your tincture making, but for just getting started, the folk method is great, and it works pretty well too. If you have a lot of nettle, you can also dry it, so you can have nettle year-round. So I'm just putting it into my dehydrator, but you can also let it air dry as long as the air isn't too humid. And then you can use the dried nettle to make tea, or you can even crumble it up into soups to add a lot more nutrients. In my opinion, the most fun way to use nettle is as a food. So we can get all the nutrients of nettle by eating it. And we can steam the greens, we can make a traditional nettle soup, or my favorite way is to make a pesto. You can't eat nettle raw because of its stinging hairs, but fortunately, cooking it, so heating it or blending it too, easily destroys the stinging hairs, so that formic acid degrades very quickly. Nettle is a readily available wild spring green that is more nutritious than anything you'll find in the grocery store. And I think it tastes pretty dang good too. We can't boil down the essence of nettle into a list of facts, nor would we want to. Plants are complex beings, and the plant constituents are complicated, and we don't know how they all synergize with each other or how a plant reacts differently in different people's bodies. However, that doesn't stop us from continuing to learn and love nettle through direct experience. So please, I encourage you to go get outside, find some nettle, carefully identify and harvest it, and then make it into an amazing meal or a nourishing herbal tea. By doing so, you'll restore your connection to this important plant and also become more familiar with local nature and the land you live on. I'm Leah from Time and Place, and thanks so much for watching.